Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much. And thank you as well. I did my PGC at Newton Park, so absolutely brought back some lovely memories there. Thank you as well to those of you that have already read the companion paper and given us some really constructive feedback. And we really want that conversation to continue. And our talk today really is a companion piece to the companion paper, if you like. So we're going to not so much directly refer to it, but really keep you thinking, hopefully. So if you haven't already read it, please do read it. And we have, if I get them right, there it is. So you've got a link, and this will be on the website as well to get to that paper. The irony is not lost that actually Caroline and I have been emailing early in the morning, late at night, weekends, trying to get this paper together. And actually, we are speaking from two people who work. I guess, have we got our work-life balance right? Who knows, really? But I'm not suggesting that we have the answers. What we want to do is to promote debate. What we would like you to do, if possible, please, you've got two sheets combined into one on your chairs. If you haven't got one, there should be one around, or we've got some spares. Just lovely to see so many of you. Thank you for coming in after lunch as well. Hopefully they are self-explanatory. We would like to have these back very much so that we can feed this into our further research on this area. But like I say, if you're not sure how to complete it, we're also it was interesting, I just did this little example here and realised it's actually quite revelatory. So they are anonymised. If there is anything that you'd rather not share, then just don't tick the box and we won't include it, or don't hand it in. And these are on the slides as well, so if you want to use them with colleagues and feed them back into us, again, very welcome to do so. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline now, and I will join you again in a bit.
Thank you. I've just sent some more sheets around the back there. They are coming across. We didn't actually put these out in the final rows or at the extreme ends because we thought that not that many people would actually be here right to the end. And it shows how much we are thinking about issues of workload, I would say, and also the extraordinary stamina of our teacher education communities. So it is on its way to you if you haven't found a sheet on your seats at the moment. Okay. We know the world that we are in. We had a fantastic and disturbing summary of our situation regarding workload and conditions affecting the retention and recruitment of teachers to our profession. We heard this from Mary yesterday. Certainly, Julie and I are not going to be over the same territory. We are taking it for granted. We know we heard it brilliantly. We're not going to go through the statistics. Let's take as our baseline that there is an issue about teacher retention and recruitment, and that there is a connection to workload and conditions. And just really to put this into a small perspective, this kind of advertisement is something that we've all probably seen versions of. It captures, if you like, the moment and the context. For those of you who can't quite see it clearly at the back, perhaps because it is a photograph of an advertisement in my local post office. We urgently require primary and secondary school teachers, teaching assistants, cover supervisors for permanent, full-time, part-time supply, daily, weekly, long-term basis. Every possible kind of availability. We want you, we need you. And what you can't see clearly, but I'm going to enlarge it, this little symbol at the bottom there. If you introduce a teacher to us, this private recruitment company, would you like to earn £150? Simply introduce a teacher to Class Education or umpteen others, and when they've completed 10 days' work, the money is yours. We've all got versions of this, haven't we? I found it fascinating. This was there alongside all the advertisements for gardeners, cleaners, you name it, teachers roll up. But of course, what's really quite tragic about this in many ways is that we know this is part of a far wider discourse around what we've come to think of as the global education reform movement, in terms of how teachers and their work have become commodities, units of resource, if you like, to be bartered, to be exchanged, to be managed in order to satisfy what we might call the neoliberal agenda. Again, I'm not going to go into very much detail around that. Stephen Ball gave a fantastic keynote here 6 years ago, where he talked to us about his work on understanding neoliberalism and its impact on the management of education throughout our systems, throughout schooling, throughout teaching, throughout teacher education, throughout universities, and affecting our identities, in terms of the marketisation of education, in terms of the encroachment of the economic into all spheres of education, in terms of the language that we look at fairly recently. We had the DFE talking about having sufficiency of teachers as a way of us trying to understand this commodity that is teachers that we need to manage. It's about the financialisation of individual worth, which is really where Julie and I are going with our thoughts today about workload and its impact on teacher attrition. And Stephen Ball, just taking a quote from his work on this, which was the background to his keynote a few years ago here, that really this relates to who we are as human beings, what we value, and it changes what it means to be a teacher and to teach. And we think this comes very close to also what it means to be a teacher educator and to work in the ways that we do. And it means really thinking about how all of us are subject to what it means to make things work and to be part of the What Works agenda and what that has meant for teachers. Now, this isn't particularly new, of course. We've heard about this, and again, Mary gave us a version of this yesterday. But what Julie and I are doing today is looking at this, if you like, through a slightly different perspective. We don't for a moment argue with Mary's conclusion yesterday that we need a political solution to bring about significant change. We don't for a moment refute that. And the need for policy change is urgent and immediate, and we hope that it comes. And there are kinds of things happening now, but we're going to problematise some of that. But what we're also saying is that it takes more than that because of what has happened to teachers' identities in terms of who they think they are and how they measure their own worth and how their worth is measured by significant others. And that this is hard, emotional work to think differently about our workload. When he was here, I actually took some notes. I was so interested. I'd read Stephen's work, amazing. I took some notes, and these are actually quotations from his keynote 6 years ago. I had kept them. I do that kind of thing. And these are some quotes that he said. First of all, counter-discourse is possible. Although things are so difficult, it is possible to think and act differently and behave differently, to change our behaviours. Maybe the target now is to refuse what we are, what we have become, how we have been positioned within this discourse. That means we have to recognise its presence in our everyday lives and relationships. And we're going to be thinking particularly about that in relation to teachers in a moment. The possibility is there for struggle and resistance. And it's really about a kind of ethical responsibility we have around the ethics of opposition. That seemed an incredibly brave and ambitious position to be able to take 6 years ago. It's possibly more possible now in terms of what things have come to and in the beginnings of policy shift that we are seeing with some kind of degree of help. Essentially, the first area that we're going to look at as a kind of theoretical lens for this is around the idea of ideological co-option. And in a few minutes, Julie's going to be talking about habitus and about emotional capital. And they are linked in terms of how we are trying to problematise the issue, going beyond the idea of the political agenda needing to change, but how we need to change within ourselves. So the first one around ideological co-option, I'd like to look at it like this, that it's more than teachers experiencing acquiescence, giving up, resigning themselves to workload or leaving. It's more than the fact that we all know this happens and how dreadful it is and what it's doing. What we're really interested in here is the internalisation of workload among the teaching profession as a proxy for expertise and worth. And that's the hub of the problem from this perspective. What has happened to teachers' perceptions and how it has shaped their leaders' perceptions of the value and the worth of the teachers in their schools. So, most of us in this room work very regularly with student teachers, trainee teachers on employment routes, and with newly qualified teachers and recently qualified teachers. And in the conversations that we have with them in our various roles, when they come back and they talk to us about first experiences in schools as workplaces, it's always very striking to listen to their impressions of the teachers that they meet and the incredible jobs that they do. And the kinds of things that student teachers have said to us on return as part of their ITE programs. For example, they've come to believe that data collection, management and communication are part of being a great teacher, because great teachers do that, and they do it really well. How hard to develop that expertise if you've gone through the huge learning process of mastering it. Extreme workload is inevitable. It's how we maintain standards. What do we think about someone in a staff room who says, yeah, actually I had a great weekend off and I'm not planning on working when I go home tonight and I've managed all my work within the day? What's going on in the minds of those around in terms of how good they might be as a teacher? The best teachers work extremely long hours, the things that really impress new entrants to the profession. The best teachers, the ones I really admire, you couldn't believe the hours they're working. And they teach better by serial adopting of the latest initiatives and the huge time and effort and energy that's invested in that. And it comes to be natural that guilt is the reaction to being out of school to access professional learning, because we are so committed to our pupils. They can only possibly learn if we're with them constantly, glued to them. And that if we take ourselves away from them to learn differently, to network, to attend opportunities that are outside of at twilights and weekends, that somehow this is damaging our learners. So by ideological co-option of experienced teachers, we need to think about their role in this. The experienced teachers and the leaders that are very much admired and looked to as models by our new teachers embody such beliefs in their own practices. They complain about it, but they embody it at the same time. It's a kind of professional schizophrenia. As we all know, Strauss wrote about that many years ago in a different kind of context. They model excessive workload and being able to cope because so many of them do. So it's doable until it's too late. They've often earned seniority and respect among their colleagues. How great is that? They're instrumental, therefore, in perpetuating the practices that have led to their success. Believe it to be intrinsic to a teacher's professional identity. It's the way we talk, the hours I worked, the time I went to bed, the amount of marking that I did. It becomes part of their professional DNA. We're arguing that it's that difficult to shift, to change the talk along with the self-belief and the sense of worth and identity. If we look, because it came out on Friday, so we're bound to look at what the core content framework might say about this in terms of professional behaviours, because that's where we might look to for guidance in terms of policy going here. We know that very often, of course, throughout this document, we have learn that, which tells us what we ought to know and sources of knowledge, and learn how to. And in this specific area of workload, management of time and well-being, we found that for learn that, there are actually no dedicated points to that, to what must be learned about that. There are lots of points under Standard 8 around other things, but when we come to look at this specific area, there is nothing there about what must be learned about it. Interesting. There is one reference in those reading lists that accompany it that's set in Norway. There's a lot of studies that have taken place within the United Kingdom about this that says what we might need to learn. And we've got our top point here. They need to learn how to manage workload and well-being by observing how expert colleagues use and personalise systems and routines, etc. Yes, and that is part of co-option, because we observe people doing this superbly until they can't stand it anymore. What kind of modelling, what do they need to understand about expertise in managing workload, actually? There are other points here which perhaps give us some pointers for the conversations that we could have within our partnerships with our mentors and with our school leaders around discussing and analysing expert colleagues, the importance of the right to support. But unfortunately here it's then followed with to deal with misbehaviour. That isn't what we're talking about. Protecting time for rest and recovery, yes, brilliant. But why do we need rest and recovery? From what? From the amount of work that we're asking people to do. This one we thought was a really nice kind of hopeful pointer around the idea that collaboration might be a way forward. What about genuine collaboration in relation to workload? What does it do to work for sustained periods, co-teaching with experienced colleagues, for new teachers, for example, and for recently qualified teachers? What might it mean to really take collaboration to fulfil its potential? So what we're suggesting is that we have the risk of best intentions with some of the documentation that has been published, obviously, around this time last year, that offered us some advice around protecting new teachers. We think that sometimes we ask the wrong questions about workload and seek the wrong solutions, how to make it manageable, how to be more resilient. We think that we develop strategies that therefore maintain this market-eye system as it is, rather than saying, actually, we need to stop doing some things. We therefore become unwittingly complicit. We are part of the cooperation machinery, and mentors and leaders who enable young teachers and new teachers to be able to imitate their behaviours are perpetuating the context that actually we need to change. The dangers of the what works agenda now being applied to reducing workload. Let's manage this rather than critique and question it. We need to be alert to sleepwalking into further deprofessionalisation of teaching. I'm actually going to skip really quickly through these because this is more in the context of some work. I don't know if Joe's still here, but Joe McIntyre and Andy Hobson did some lovely work about what happens, which they found out through their interviews with new entrants to the profession a few years ago around fabrication and the fact that we don't know until it is too late in the context of workload, let's say, about what new teachers are really experiencing through their strategies of strategic silence and strategic avoidance in terms of what they'll talk about. We won't go there now, there won't be time, but our slides will have that on later if you're interested. There's also some fascinating work which we've put out there. How would it be to discuss this as a proposition in our partnerships? The fact that we could come to a conclusion that we are the profession that eats its young. And we can say, we need policy to change that. That's a political shift. Yes. But also, who is it that gives new teachers the most challenging classes, the greatest range of classes to plan and prepare for, more out-of-class duties, restricted professional learning? And that's a whole string of studies over time that have been saying this. Really uncomfortable conversations to be had. It is around taking forward uncomfortable conversations that Julie's now going to continue.
Thank you. Brilliant. So, thinking about all of those elements that Caroline's been talking about, it can be quite bleak. And I think one of the things that I really wanted to achieve with the companion paper was a sense of hope, a sense of way forward. And one of the ways of starting that was from language. For me, the idea of workload is already a very negative. It has it's load. It's about, I see a donkey with huge packs on it, and I think if we really want to be professional, we have to take hold of that. We have to find a way of thinking about professionally acceptable workload. And that may not mean that you don't work hard. It may mean you still work very hard, but you actually, for you, that is professionally acceptable in how you want to move forward. So language is absolutely key, and we have to take hold of that. we have to recognise the power imbalance that happens in schools. So even using the DFE toolkit, for example, most schools, many schools, would have taken hold of that agenda as a senior management team. Now, I delegated that to a member of staff, a member of teaching staff, and all of the discussions they had around the toolkit were without senior managers there. And that was really important, I felt, to be able to do that, to set the tone that this is something you need to take some responsibility for, not just us saying, okay, right, we're not going to have emails after 6 o'clock, or we're going to stop marking. And some quite reactive policies that schools have taken, which don't necessarily answer the question. Work creep, some really interesting information on work creep, and even last night, I heard somebody actually mention this as well in a different context. So work creep is the idea that because work has outcomes and because work has timescales, that we prioritise work over things like family, which are often much more nebulous. And actually, you could argue, again, with a sort of slightly neoliberal agenda, that because work, those outcomes, you can see whether you've done it or not, the sense of achievement sometimes can be more attainable than family, which might be a little bit more, up and down. So it's much easier to give in to work priorities than it is sometimes to prioritise family, or often to prioritise family. Speaking up, not enough, really. We need to be thinking about how can we speak up, how can we enable our staff, how can we enable trainees to learn about speaking up in a fair way. And intellectual satisfaction, absolutely, there's not enough written in there, is there? There's not enough that we can share and get excited about, because actually that's at the heart of this. I work in my job because I absolutely love it, and I find it professionally exciting, and I find it intellectually rigorous. So that's really important that we hold on to that, and actually ownership. Who owns this? So I just thought this was quite interesting, really, around interruptions. And ironically, I just wanted to test out whether this worked, the little chart that you've got. And so I was at the photocopier. I had a trainee teacher and an NQT in the room next to the photocopier. And I'm like, oh, can you just do this for me? Obviously, it's anonymised, so I don't want it back. I just need to know whether the process works. And I came out and I was actually smiling to myself because I thought, I've just done the very thing I've put in the slide last night about, So the truth is that, I like this idea that interruptions, contribute to the expansion of work hours. We do it all the time, don't we? Let's think about this. How do we get people to think about this? I just wanted to explain, in the companion paper, it talks about putting your Boudica pants. And if you don't understand, if you have no actual reference to that, I just want to explain it a little bit. So the companion paper initially came out from me talking with my staff around workload as well, once Mark had done his work, and then just opening up that debate a bit more. And one of the staff said, well, you just need to put your Boudica pants on. And it is that idea of sort of, almost like warrior queen. Should we have to be warrior queens in order to stand up for, for ourselves and not be put upon? And so that really did lead into this whole idea then of emotional capital as well, which I'll come on to. This is quite interesting. So individuals with high esteem may be more willing to attempt to protect their time for non-work activities. But again, thinking what Caroline was saying, what does that look like then to the rest of the school culture? If it's out of, high esteem that you're able to say, do you know I'm going to the cinema tonight? That's okay. How do we feel about that? Really important. High segmenters. Interestingly, you might fit into more than one of these categories. And people whose individual work identity is, it's central, are less likely to put work to one side. So, Bourdieu, have we got any Bourdieu scholars in here? She says nervously. There is some, I have to say, Cheryl Reynolds, who's at Huddersfield University. I don't know if she's still there, but I found some really good stuff. If you want a quick, in a better nutshell maybe than this. Thank you. Yeah, it was really helpful. And she's done some really interesting, a game that she's done as well to work with trainees around Bourdieu and around capital, I thought was excellent. So just thinking about our field, social setting in which we operate, I'll leave you to read this because I don't want to go into, I'm very conscious of time, but I think the bit to pull upon really is to think about all of those influences on our trainees as they go into, for example, a little bit of fancy stuff there, oh no. So say the field is their first placement school, so they've gone into their first placement school, and then you've got all of these influences, so you've got the beliefs of others, which may include beliefs of their family, for example. In the session this morning on special needs, you know, Trevor was talking about his own trainees coming in, and they are, you know, in a sense, is it naive? You know, they've come with a different set of thinking than the one that you hope they will have by the time they leave you. And that's because they've already been influenced by a whole series of different forms of capital. And I think, you know, attitudes, political viewpoints, these all form. And I think what Bourdieu doesn't specifically talk about emotional capital, but it is very, you know, it's a very valid element in terms of, you know, the emotions of others and how we use emotion as a form of capital. I think is particularly key within education, within school. There's quite a lot of writing around emotional capital with mothers and children, for example, but it's very key within this as well. We have put some references at the end if you're interested. So it's just thinking about this. You know, it becomes like a sixth sense, the habitus. So I don't know why I think this is, but you know, this is where I'm at. And of course, any form of capital is an exchange. So I have a real beef about cultural capital, and it is there in the Ofsted framework. And my beef being that most people don't really understand that capital is a form of exchange. It's not a set of cultural experiences. It's about how you use those experiences to be able to exchange within society and in socialised places. And it's really important we get that right. So that same framework applies here in all of these forms of capital as well, that you give back out as well. So just to explain that a little bit more, some examples here, and of course you can think of lots of your own. This might be something that you could do with trainees, but so sort of received emotional capital that might be negative. I mean, you just have to think of your mother on your shoulder, don't you, for this sort of thing. But you know, I know you're feeling overworked at the moment, but we do just need this by Friday. So you're not really acknowledging, you're still holding the power, the person telling you this. You don't mind doing this for me, do you? I do that all the time. I've been feeling so stressed all night after you told me how upset you were about the incident yesterday. So this person, they've taken hold of the emotion. They've taken ownership of that, and they've negated the other person's feelings in there. I've come to, and this might be the person themselves saying, I've come into work this morning, but I really don't feel well. That one drives me mad. So it's like, you know, take ownership of that. If you're not well, then that's okay. It's okay not to be well. Don't make me make the decision that you need to go home. And then some examples of positive, you know, where it can potential for positive exchange. Would you be able to work on this more easily from home or in school? Wouldn't it be great? You know, managers have those conversations. We do have that conversation. What seems a reasonable time frame? Wow, let's do it. This has really played on my mind. How are you feeling about it? One of my staff has just had a really horrible phone exchange with a parent. Lots more aggression from parents in the last 6 months. But it's important. I've just emailed her back because she needs to know that it was okay to talk about that unpleasantness, and I need to know that she's doing things with staff who are still there to make sure she's okay. I have found this quite hard to make sense of. Would you be able to go through it with me again? Again, can we engage trainees in having those conversations? I'm feeling very anxious in the mornings in the staff room briefings, and there may be days when I struggle to come in. Can I talk to you about how to manage this better? Again, that was a genuine example. So much of this can cross over into mental health and about supporting the mental health and well-being of our staff. So just, again, thinking really about really ways, using emotional capital as a way of challenging emotion norms in education. Really, really important. And this, we mentioned Cottingham in the paper as well, the companion paper, thinking just about what adds into that emotional capital. So work-life balancing is an ongoing job, one that can be consciously managed by employees and employers. The process is necessarily, although rarely explicitly so, an ongoing negotiation between employee and employer. I think this is key. It's ongoing. This is not something that, you know, for your trainees you can give to them in a package and then they go away and think they've cracked it. You know, it really is. It's a dynamic. We're going to have to keep having those conversations and keep, you know, we have to encourage the new teachers to be setting up structures and structured structures that will enable their future employees to be able to have those conversations honestly and I guess positively, making positive change. So all members of the school community need to engage to benefit from this collective knowledge and experience of workload to build new insights and practices. So there's lots of hope, isn't there? There's really hope for what are we going to do? I mean, I do think an understanding of emotional capital is key to this. So I think this is back over to you, isn't it?
Yeah. So it won't be any surprise to think that we're really interested in looking at ways that we can have productive dialogue in the spheres where we can have some influence with our partnership schools, for example, with our student teachers, with the recently qualified teachers we work with, through the early career framework. Let's see what the opportunities are to have productive, constructive dialogue that will look at these things explicitly. It needs to be dialogic. It's about changing school cultures, and we might say, well, maybe that's the business of lots of other people. But where is it going to start? We who work so much with the new entrants to the profession and those early career teachers need to be part of the dialogue. How can we help all of the stakeholders that we work with to understand the importance of safe places and spaces to talk about workload and change? Where and when can we have honest conversations? Is this something we can talk about within our partnerships, with our management committees on our teacher education programmes? Is this something we can talk about through our networks of leadership? Is this something we can talk about as part of our mentor development days, for example? Where can we talk about this and get the honesty out there? How can we talk with those very influential people who make huge impressions on new teachers? How can we help them to understand the responsibilities of modelling the way we work? Not just how we manage incredible workloads, but how we might actually reconsider ourselves as models. How can we help those hugely influential people to think about the ways that they talk about work and the ways in which work is talked about in staff rooms, within departments, in private places and in open places within schools? The stuff that builds the culture, the stuff that really needs to change if we're talking about an acceptance, an explicit embracing of the fact that these hugely conflicted identities are there in our teachers. We grow them in the moments they arrive, and they think that impossible workload, dealing with huge stress, becomes it's normal, it's the job, until it can't be tolerated anymore. We need frank, difficult conversations about this. This means acknowledging that we're all co-opted, all of us do it. When we send emails, when we decide it's okay, I will work through the weekend, when I won't go to that social event, or I won't be at the family thing, or whatever it is, we model it too. And we've all been teachers, and so on and so forth. Can we help those who are influential in schools to feel brave enough to say, yeah, this is what I'm teaching my teachers to do? Whose role is it to talk like that with leaders. I mean, Julie and I have worked together on this as a school leader, a teacher, educator, a person with multiple other roles with other networks. I'm fortunate to be able to work in 2 countries in the UK at the moment. These are common problems that we face across our systems and across our sectors. Who can talk to who about this? I'm so glad that it wasn't just me talking here, that it's Julie as a head teacher, and I think Julie has enjoyed sort of the idea that we can work together from our different perspectives on this. Doing this on your own is so hard. So who needs to talk to who to get conversations going? Where are the allies? Where are the starting points? And it means finding allies to be able to be strong enough to critique the technicist advice, which is what our first paper was about, which is not what we're going to be talking about now, but it's on the UCET website. The technicist advice on workload that actually maintains and protects a lot of the sources of the dilemmas. It asks the wrong questions. It asks us to focus on reducing the things that might help new teachers to learn so that they can do more work. So that's another kind of that's another paper, and we're not talking about that here, but how about talking about these things within our partnerships? So these are the ways we might be able to support what Stephen Boyle taught, this ethical opposition, to take on our responsibility. If we feel within this community, who can we do it with? Because the workforce has to be central to its own change, we need to own it. That's it.
Thank you to both of you, and I would advise you, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't read the paper on professionally acceptable workload, do look at the UCET website and read it, because it really did go down a storm. So thank you, Julie and Caroline. We've got time for a couple of questions, so hands up, please. Anyone? I think you spoke for yourself, but I really would advise you to read the paper, and I'm really grateful for people coming to this session, because it's always very tempting to actually leave now and leave early on the last day. So I think the paper itself, the number of people here is testament to the reception that the paper got.
Our emails are on the first slide as well, so do genuinely, have that dialogue with us. We want to continue having this conversation and hopefully putting more supportive work out there as well.
Okay, so thank you again very much.
Thank you.